This podcast is produced by the Harwood Productions Podcast Network. To learn more about the network and to find more of our shows, visit us online at www.harwoodpodcast.com. This episode of Sketchup, a 3D Toolbox, is brought to you by 3D Connection, makers of the Space Navigator. To learn more about them, visit their website at www.3dconnection.com. Hey there everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Sketchup, a 3D Toolbox. I'm Cameron Harris, and this is episode number 24. Today I'm going to show you how you can take a hand-drawn floor plan, scan it into your computer, and then use it as a guide for a three-dimensional model in SketchUp. This is really a useful way to model rooms, and particularly large projects like houses. Let me show you how you can do it. So to start off with, I have just a blank SketchUp project. There's nothing in it, haven't started modeling anything. And then over here on my desktop, I have this image, which is actually a sketch that I've done, and then I scanned it in. Now, there's nothing too special about this drawing. I did ink it in after I had drawn it with pencil, just to kind of make sure that it would show up nicely on the scanner. That's not necessary. I did try and make the lines as straight and the angles as precise as possible by using a ruler, but it's practically impossible to make it perfect when you're drawing it by hand. So be careful, but don't get too overly critical about it. Like you can see this line up here looks like it's sloping down a little bit. It probably is. That's fine. We're going to fix that later. So I've got this on my desktop just so I know where it is. And now what we're going to do is we're going to import this into our SketchUp model to use as a guide. And the way you do that is by going up to the File menu and then Import. Now you might remember a very similar looking, I'll just switch this to column view, that's the way I like it. You might remember a very similar looking dialog box, in fact it's this very dialog box, when we talked about how to import images and use them as custom textures. We were doing that with tiles at that point. Now, what we're going to do is something slightly different this time. Make sure that Format is set to all supported image types. You can set it so that it'll only do bitmap or JPEG images or only import SketchUp files, but all supported image types just kind of, makes it so that whether it's a JPEG or a bitmap file or whatever, it'll always be available to you. Now we're going to select our floor plan image right here. You can see there's a little preview of it. But the trick here is that this drop down here says use as texture. Now if I were to say use as texture, it would then prompt me to pick a surface, a face, for me to paint this texture on. Now that's not what we want to do this time. If we click this drop down, we have a couple other options. Use as new matched photo, that's not what we want. That's a more advanced modeling technique that we'll be talking about later in a later episode. Use as image is what we want in this case. Now use as texture, you need to apply the texture and basically like paint it onto a surface. Use as image, on the other hand, imports the image as its own object. Now let me show you what I mean by that. I'll go ahead and hit import. And now it's going to just kind of, I can place the image wherever I want. So I'm grabbing it by the bottom left corner right there, and I'm just going to put this right at the center of this axis right here, just to kind of keep it simple. And then when I click once, I can now drag this out from the top right corner and make it as big as I want. And you can see that my dimensions box actually says height. Now in this case, I'm not really too concerned about the size of it, and I'll show you why. Because entering in a custom height right here isn't going to scale it properly for me, so I'm just going to go ahead and make it, say 6 feet or whatever. Just click once, and there we go. Now you can see that what it's done is it's imported the image and used it as an actual object. So it has faces and it's surrounded by lines, although you can't see them. But if you click it once, it's like it's a group. You click once, it selects the whole thing. Now, this is really nice because we don't need to make our own custom faces. We don't need to resize anything. We can just import in the image and use it as kind of like a big card almost. Think of this like as if you just printed up the image and you drop it into your 3D model and you can make it as big as you want. So what's great about this is that then we can model on top of this and use all these lines as a guide. But of course there's a problem. You can see that I was very careful to mark almost all of the walls in my drawing with the size, the dimensions of each room, the length of each wall. So you can see like this big wall here should be 12 feet. If I rotate over here, this wall here should be 6 feet, all this stuff. Now, if I model on top of this right now, I'm not going to get the proper scale. I mean, it'll, as far as like, proportions, it'll be fine, but let me show you what I mean. I'll switch to the tape measure tool by hitting the T key. And now what I'm going to do is, I know that this wall here is supposed to be 6 feet. That's what it says right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the tape measure tool, and I'm just going to click once here on the beginning of this wall, move over here, and click on this other point right here. Now I'm not going to click, I'm just going to hover so that I can get a little pop-up that tells me how long it is. And you can see I get a little pop-up by my cursor, and also my dimensions box now says length. It says that it is 2 feet 7 inches, not 6 feet. So if I were to model this right now using these lines as guides, what I would end up with is a very, very small room. It wouldn't be the proper size at all. So what I want to do is, before I start modeling, I want to resize this image to make it the proper size, so that if I were to measure this wall here, it would actually say 6 feet. Now, you might be wondering how exactly I can do that. Like, for example, I know that this wall here is 12 feet, but you can see if I were to make just this whole image 12 feet wide, well, I've got space on either side here. It's not going to be very accurate at all. This is a really neat little feature in SketchUp that I use constantly. Now, the key with this feature is that at the moment, make sure nothing else is in your model. Because when we do this, it's going to resize not just the image, but everything in our model all at once. In a later episode, I'll show you how you can affect only a specific object, but for the moment, it's just going to affect the entire model. So you've imported your image, nothing else. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do what we just did. Let's choose a wall that we know should be, a certain length. So let's go with this wall, as long as we're working with this wall. 6 feet. This wall should be 6 feet. I'm going to zoom in quite a bit and get a little bit accurate. I'm going to click once there with the tape measure tool. And as if I was going to draw a guide, I'm going to come over here, and you can see I'm snapping to the green axis, so this line is pretty straight. And that right there is where my 6-foot wall should end. And I'm going to click this time. Now, it didn't do anything because I wasn't dragging from an edge, so I'm not going to get like a little dotted line as a guide. But you can see that I still, in my dimensions box, have a value. I still have that 2 foot 7 inches value. Now this is what's really cool. I can now enter in, as long as I don't do anything else, don't switch tools, don't move, don't model anything, just don't do anything and look at that box. It says 2 feet 7 inches. I can enter in my own custom value. So for example, I know that what I just measured should really be 6 feet exactly. So I'm just going to type in 6 apostrophe, 6 and then apostrophe to make it 6 feet, and I'm going to hit enter. Now when I do that, I'm going to get a little alert that says, do you want to resize the model? And it's important to point out that this is resizing the entire model. So not just the image, anything else in your model is going to scale with it. Do you want to resize it? Say yes, and you can see that the image is now much bigger. Now this is what's so cool. It has basically scaled it so that what I just measured, the guideline that I had just drawn, I basically told it to scale the image so that that guideline was exactly 6 feet. And I'll show you what exactly it's done. I'll click once here to measure. Then I'll hover over here to measure again. Look at that. I'll click once. It's hard to get very accurate because there's a difference in the thickness of the lines and everything, but this now says 5 feet 11 inches and 11/16 of an inch. So that's within the margin of error of just where I'm clicking. That is now a 6-foot wall. Now let's try this again with another wall. Here's one that's supposed to be 3 feet. If I click here and then over here, 2 feet 11.5 inches. So that's plenty close enough. I'm probably just missing something with my selection, or just tiny little differences in how I've drawn my sketch. So no big deal if it's not precisely accurate, but it's certainly a lot closer than it was, and this is perfect to start doing our actual modeling. So the first thing that I'm going to do is make sure that this image is grouped. So for example, if you ungrouped it, you would want to group it again because you're going to be modeling right on top of this thing, and if it's ungrouped, then your walls and your floor and everything are going to stick to this image, and it's going to be really difficult to move them later on. So make sure it's grouped, and you can tell just by switching to the selection tool, clicking off, and then just clicking once on the image. If it selects just the whole thing in one click, it's grouped. And now what we're going to do is we can actually use the rectangle tool to start drawing some rectangles on this thing. So I'll just hit R to switch to the rectangle tool, and I'll start at this corner right here. Now, the first thing I want to take a look at is I want to first draw this room right here, which if I look at these dimensions that I've written down here, this room should be 5 feet wide this way and 9 feet long that way. So I'm going to start at this outside corner right here, and I'm just going to click right around where I think the corner should be. I'm going to drag out, right? Now, I could just kind of eyeball this, but I want this to be pretty accurate. So you can see down in my dimensions box, it says 9 feet, 1 inch, 4 feet, whatever. So I basically want to make that 9 feet by 5 feet, exactly. So I'm going to go ahead and type in 9 apostrophe and then comma 5 apostrophe and hit enter. And you can see that it's drawn a nice little rectangle for me, which is almost exactly fitting into my drawing. And now I'll show you another nice little trick. When you draw a rectangle, it of course draws a big face in the middle of it, which covers up your drawing. If you just click once on that face and select just that face, no lines or anything like that, and hit the delete key, now it's a little bit tricky to see right now, but if I click on these things, you can see my individual lines are still there. And you can see that they are really close. The only difference is it looks like 9 feet is a little bit longer. Go with the SketchUp dimensions, because SketchUp you know is correct if you're drawing the sketch by hand, margin for error. So don't worry about that. That is plenty close enough. Now let's go with another one. We've got that room. Let's draw this room next to it, which is 7 feet long, 6 feet wide. Now what's cool is if I zoom in on this one right here, you can see I've still got these lines here. So if I use my rectangle tool, switch back to the rectangle tool by hitting R, I can actually snap right to that corner so that my edges stay perfectly lined up. So that's very nice. Now I'm just going to drag this out, look down in my dimensions box to see which is going to be the longer side. 7 feet, 6 feet. So I want it to be 7 feet by 6 feet. So I'll go ahead and type in 7 feet by 6 feet. Hit enter, and now you can see it's done the same thing again. Now, when I drew that, it not only drew in a face for this rectangle, but because it was right next to this rectangle, it drew in the face there. That's just the way SketchUp works. Just go ahead and select and delete those faces again. And you can see that, okay, my drawing was a little bit lopsided. I got a little bit of an edge thing going on there, but still a very nice guideline. Now, the last thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and extend out this part right here, because I've got these rooms here, but I don't have this big room here. Now, in this case, the rectangle tool isn't really going to be the best way to model this particular room because it's not actually a rectangle. It's more of an L shape. Now, I already have, because I've drawn these rooms, I already have these lines right here, right? So I only need to do these 3 lines on the outside. So to do that, I am actually going to use the line tool. So I'm going to hit L for the line tool, so now I can draw individual lines. And I've marked on my drawing 8 feet. So this wall is supposed to come out 8 feet. So I'm going to go ahead and snap to this corner right here. And I'm going to go ahead and hit the left arrow key to lock my line to the green axis. Make sure my line doesn't go out at an angle or anything like that. And now I'm going to type in 8 feet for the length. There we go, perfect. And you can see, yes, this particular, just as I thought, this particular wall was a little bit lopsided, so no big deal. Now it still wants me to keep drawing lines, but it's locked to the green axis. So to get it out of the green axis, I'm just going to hit the left arrow key again, and now I'm in freeform. I want this to go on the right axis this time, so I'm going to hit the or I'm sorry, the red axis, red and right, colors and directions, they kind of keep them nicely color coded, but I'm going to hit the right arrow key and that'll lock it into the red axis. So now, as you can see, the room is, you're starting to see the not so accuracy of my drawing. But what's really cool about this is that I can see right here, this is supposed to be 12 feet. Now I could enter in a custom value, 12 feet and do that. But remember, I still have these lines right over here. In fact, I still have this one selected. And if I snap to this line right here, look at that, 12 feet exactly, because I have a 5 foot room there, 7 foot room there, 5 foot plus 7 foot equals 12 feet. And because I'm being nice and accurate with all this, it matches up perfectly. So I can just, as long as I'm locked into the red axis, it'll stay straight out like that to the side. And I can just click on this line here. Boom, I've got that. And then I'll just click once more to finish up. So now you can see when I finished that line, it went ahead and filled in this face out here. That's good. And I can actually go ahead and I want the faces to come back for these rooms right here, right? So what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to redraw one of the lines in here. So like, for example, I'll take this line right here. I'll just click once here, click once out there, and there we go. Now I have just retracing the lines kind of causes SketchUp to re-render the faces for you if you've deleted them. Just retrace one line. You don't have to do all of them. Just one will do. So now I've got these faces here and these lines, and this is basically exactly what I drew. I mean, it's not exactly what I drew because what I drew was slightly lopsided and not entirely accurate, but this is a perfect starting off point. So now I'm going to show you how you can take these and extrude them into 3D walls. But first, I want to thank the people who make this show possible, 3D Connection. Now, as I'm sure you know by now, these guys make the Space Navigator, which is just a fantastic device. If you work in SketchUp at all, even if you're just a hobbyist, this thing is a must. It makes navigating in SketchUp so easy, so fluid, so smooth, and so intuitive too. I mean, you can sit down at this thing and within 5 minutes, you've learned all you need to know. You don't even need to read the instruction manual. Once you install the driver, you're off to the races. You can just start spinning around in SketchUp all you want. And I have to say, one of the things that I really love about it is that it just makes the movement so much smoother than if you're working with, keyboard shortcuts and mouse movements. You can just move so smoothly rather than using, say, a mouse keyboard shortcut combination where you have to switch between tools and then you're dragging and clicking all over the place. It's really jerky, and that gets a little hard to watch after a while. So this is just really a great way to navigate in SketchUp. If you want to learn more about them, go ahead and visit their website, which is www.3dconnection.com. I want to thank them so much for supporting this episode of SketchUp, a 3D toolbox. So now what I want to do is I want to start extruding this into 3D, because what I have here is basically just a digital representation of my drawing. It's still in 2 dimensions. A little bit more accurate, but still 2 dimensions. And SketchUp is all about 3D. That's why I'm doing this. So what I want to do is I want to basically extrude these things into walls. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I want to make sure I have a floor to work with. So, right now I just have basically these flat 2-dimensional purple faces, and that's not really what I want to do. You might be tempted to leave them like that, and you certainly could just have a 2-dimensional floor, but it just makes things a lot easier later on if you extrude your floor up just a few inches and give yourself an actual 3D slab to work off of. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the push-pull tool, P key to switch to the push-pull tool, and I'm going to extrude these faces up. Now you notice they're staying purple. That's because when I drew these, SketchUp put them the wrong side out, which it sometimes does. Remember, purple means that it's the side that you're not supposed to see. White is the side that you're supposed to see. Now, does it really matter in terms of technically your model? No, it really doesn't. It doesn't affect anything, but it just kind of makes things look a little bit prettier. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select each one of these faces, right-click on them, and choose Reverse Faces. And that, you see, turns them white. So I'll just do that to all 3. There we go. I feel better now. That's one of my little pet peeves in SketchUp. going to switch back to the push-pull tool now. Click once on one of the faces, and I'm going to pull it up 6 inches. Doesn't really matter what you do, just 6 inches. Going to do this to all of them. You can do 3 inches, 1 inch. 6 inches is just kind of a nice, easy to remember round number for me. Now, the next step is to start extruding these things into walls. But there's a little bit of a problem here. You'll notice that our walls are just lines. So if I were to, say, switch to the push-pull tool and just pull these things up, I'm just getting blocks, entire blocks, and I can't really push and pull a line up. My walls don't have depth at the moment. They're just one-dimensional, really, lines that I can't extrude into anything. So what I need to do is I need to basically give these depth. Now, there's a couple ways you could do this. One of the ways you could do it is actually when you're drawing, instead of drawing your walls in just lines like I did, you could actually give them depth in your drawing. That gets a little bit tricky though. It's a lot more to keep track of. So I usually just do them in just regular lines, and then add the depth to my walls afterwards. Now, this makes my rooms a little bit smaller than I modeled them, but let me show you what I mean by that. So what I'm going to do first is, let's take this room here. This is a nice simple squarish room that I can work with. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use, if you remember several episodes back in our tools series, we were working with the offset tool. You can actually use the keyboard shortcut, which is F for offset. Hit that, now you got the offset tool. So what I'm going to do now is I actually want to offset this particular face. Now if I start clicking here, I have a different face selected. That's going to get things a little bit confusing. Switch to the selection tool and select the face that you want to offset first, then switch to the offset tool. Now you can click anywhere into the face. Oops. Just a single click, and now you can drag this out. I can make it go in, I can make these lines go out. I'm basically just getting a bigger proportionate version of that particular face. So what I want to do is I actually want to make this a little bit smaller right here. I want to offset this in 6 inches, which is a typical depth for a wall. So I'm just going to type in, I'm going to start, if you're out here and you type in 6 inches, it'll make it 6 inches bigger. You want to make sure you're in here, type in 6, there we go. That's a 6-inch wall around there. Now the next step to do is do this to all of my faces. Do it with that one, and do it with that one. So this is perfect, but one of the things you might notice is that we're going to have some double thick walls. I mean, the outer wall is fine, but if I were to say push these up like this, I'm going to have 2 walls right next to each other. As such, I'm going to have a foot, a wall with a depth of 1 foot because it's a double depth. That's not what I'm looking for. So the next step to do, once you've done this with all of your rooms, is to start simplifying. So let me show you what exactly I mean by that. Let's say let's take this one here. We've got this wall here, and we've got this wall here. Next to each other, there's just too much depth. What we want to do is we want to condense it down into 1. So what I do is I pick a wall. Now this is a pretty skinny room, so I'm actually gonna pick this wall instead of this one. Make it so this is the wall that I'll use. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use the line tool, and I'm going to draw a line here, and then I'm going to draw another line right here. So now I've got these 2 lines right here. I can now select this line in between them. The line's actually in pieces, but select and delete, select and delete. So now this wall is the only wall. This is actually given 6 inches more depth to this room, and you can see it's now just 6 inches deep all the way down here. Now, come right here, I have the same problem again, so I'm going to pick a certain wall. I'm going to make this one. This wall will be the one that stays this time. So I'll draw on the wall that I want to get rid of, draw a line here, and I will draw a line here. And now I'll select these lines. This requires a little bit of thought to think, okay, which wall do I want to stay and which wall do I want to get rid of? And then you got to figure out, okay, what lines do I need to draw to get rid of that wall? So I'll show you one last one. This is a pretty simple one, actually. I'll make it so that this will be the wall that I want to keep. So I want to get rid of this wall. Now, if I just delete this line right here, then, well, poof, I've got like just these big gaps right here. So what I want to do is I want to fill in those gaps, but it's easier to fill in the gaps before you delete the line. So you could like delete the line, figure out where the gaps are, then undo, fill in those gaps, and then you can delete the line. And there you go. You've got 6-inch walls all around. Now, part of the problem with this is if you're drawing your lines in just, if you're drawing your walls in just, lines when you're doing your sketch, then you've got to figure, okay, this room is actually going to end up being, 6 inches smaller on this side, 6 inches smaller on this side because I'm, pushing them in. I'm actually, making part of the room the wall. So like, I said that this wall here was 12 feet. And it is 12 feet, except for this 6 inches that cuts in here, this 6 inches that cuts in here. It's more like an 11-foot wall now. Think about that when you're drawing. In some cases, it might actually be easier for you to draw your walls and add depth to them. That can get a little bit tricky for me sometimes. That's just the way that I work. So if you're just doing something for fun, it doesn't really matter. If you're doing this where you actually need things to be pretty accurate, think about that. Now, the last thing that I like to do is, at the moment, if I were to use the push-pull tool, these walls are all kind of in pieces because of all these extra lines that are everywhere. So I'd have to extrude each one up individually, and kind of a pain. What I like to do instead is, as kind of a nice little finishing touch, I switch to the eraser tool. E key for the eraser tool, and I just find these lines that are dividing them. There's a line there. I get rid of the lines on the side the side too. Go over here, get a line right there, and there. And this just kind of gets rid of all the extra garbage. This will also help keep your model nice and fast because it's less for Sketchup to render. And that looks good. And last one. There we go. So now, this is kind of the moment of truth. Switch to the push-pull tool, and then you can grab your walls right here and just click once and pull them up. And then I'm going to make them 8 feet tall, typical wall height. And now you can see I have my rooms. So you can see that with more complex projects, it makes it way easier to import an image that you have drawn and then use it as a guide. And I'm actually going to have the image that I used up on our website that you can download and then use in your own models as a guide to practice this technique. And our website is www.harwoodpodcast.com. And if you have any questions for me, you can send me an email. I'm Cameron@harwoodpodcast.com. Till next time, I'll just say goodbye and good modeling.